The stagecoach rattled into Wickenburg, Arizona territory, just as the sun began its descent behind the jagged mountains, and from inside came a sound that made every man within earshot uncomfortable. A woman sobbing as though her heart had been torn clean through. Garrett Preston stood outside the general store, his weathered hands holding the reins of his bay mare, when the coach came to a dusty halt. He watched as the driver climbed down and opened the door, his gruff face softening with concern as he helped a young woman step onto the wooden platform. She wore a traveling dress the color of wheat, now rumpled from the long journey, and her auburn hair had come loose from its pins. But what struck Garrett most was the raw anguish on her face, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clutched at her throat with trembling fingers. "Miss, please," the driver was saying, "I am sure it will turn up. Maybe it fell between the seats." "I have looked everywhere," she cried, her voice breaking. "It is gone. It is really gone." Garrett found himself walking toward them before he had made a conscious decision to do so. He had placed the advertisement for a mail-order bride 3 months ago, after 2 years of running his ranch alone following his father's death. The arrangement had seemed practical at the time, almost businesslike. He needed a wife, and somewhere back east was a woman who needed a fresh start. But he had not expected her to arrive in such distress, and the sight of her grief stirred something protective in his chest. "Miss Ainsley Lawson?" he asked, removing his hat. She turned to him, her green eyes swimming with tears. "Yes, are you Mr. Preston?" "I am, Garrett Preston." He looked at the driver. "What has happened?" "She has lost something, a necklace, I think. Been crying about it since we left Phoenix." "A locket," Ainsley said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mother's locket. It was the only thing I had left of her. The only thing." The desperation in her voice made Garrett's throat tighten. He had lost his own mother to fever when he was 12, and he still carried her Bible in his saddlebag. He understood that particular brand of grief, the way a simple object could hold the weight of an entire world of memories. "Where did you last have it?" he asked gently. "I know I had it when we stopped at the way station outside of Phoenix. I checked for it because I always do. I cannot stop touching it, making sure it is still there." She pressed her hand against her collarbone. "But then the road got rough, and I must have fallen asleep, and when I woke up it was gone. We searched the coach, but it must have fallen when I stepped out to stretch my legs at one of the stops." "That is a lot of ground to cover," the driver said, shaking his head. "Could be anywhere along 50 miles of road." Ainsley made a small sound of despair and covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook with fresh sobs, and Garrett felt utterly helpless. He barely knew this woman, had only exchanged a handful of letters with her over the past months, yet seeing her cry felt like someone was driving nails into his chest. "We will find it," he heard himself say. She looked up at him, hope and disbelief warring on her face. "What?" "We will find your locket. I promise you that. Mr. Preston, the driver is right. It could be anywhere. Someone might have already picked it up, or it could have fallen into a ravine or been covered by dust from another wagon. It could be impossible." "Maybe," Garrett admitted. "But impossible just means it will take longer. That locket means something to you, which means it is worth searching for." The driver cleared his throat. "I need to get moving. Got to make Prescott by tomorrow evening." He handed down Ainsley's trunk and a smaller carpet bag. "Miss, I truly am sorry about your loss. I hope you find it." As the stagecoach pulled away, Ainsley stood on the platform looking lost and overwhelmed. Up close, Garrett could see the fine lines of exhaustion around her eyes and the way her hands trembled as she tried to compose herself. She was pretty, he noted absently, with delicate features and skin that spoke of a life spent mostly indoors. She looked entirely out of place in this dusty frontier town, like a hothouse flower transplanted into desert soil. "Come on," he said gently. "Let me show you to the house. You must be exhausted from the journey." "Mr. Preston," she began, her voice uncertain. "Garrett, please. Garrett." She took a shaky breath. "I want to thank you for your kindness about the locket, but you do not need to make promises you cannot keep. I know the situation between us is already unusual enough without adding false hope to it." "I do not make promises I do not intend to keep," he said firmly. "Now come on. My wagon is just over here." He led her to where his wagon waited, hitched to his mare and a sturdy draft horse. He lifted her trunk into the back with ease, then helped her up onto the seat. Her hand was small and cold in his, and he noticed she was still trembling. As he climbed up beside her and took the reins, he could feel her stealing glances at him, no doubt trying to reconcile the man before her with the words in his letters. The ride to his ranch took about 20 minutes, the wagon rolling along a well-worn path that cut through scrub brush and stands of mesquite. The land here was harsh but beautiful in its own way, all burnt umber earth and endless sky. Garrett watched Ainsley's face as she took it in, seeing the mixture of apprehension and wonder in her expression. "It is very different from Philadelphia," she said quietly. "I imagine so. Do you regret coming?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know yet. Everything has happened so quickly. 3 days ago I was in my cousin's house, and now I am here in Arizona territory about to marry a man I have never met." "We do not have to rush into anything," Garrett said. "I know the letters talked about a quick ceremony, but given the circumstances, maybe it would be better to take some time. Let you get your bearings." "That is kind of you. It is practical. You have had a difficult journey and you are grieving the loss of something precious. Those are not the best conditions for making a life decision." They fell into silence as the ranch came into view. It was not much, Garrett knew. A modest house built of adobe and wood, a barn that needed a new roof, a henhouse, and corrals for the horses and cattle. About 200 acres of grazing land stretched out behind it, backed by the dramatic rise of the Weaver Mountains. He had worked hard to build it up after his father's death, but it still had the rough edges of a bachelor's property. "It is not fancy," he said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it is solid. The house stays cool in summer and warm enough in winter." "It looks sturdy," Ainsley said diplomatically, though he could see her taking in the peeling paint on the door and the weeds growing along the foundation. Inside was cleaner than most bachelor quarters, at least. Garrett had spent the past week scrubbing floors and dusting surfaces, determined that his new bride would not think him a complete savage. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a simple wooden table with 4 chairs in the center. 2 doors led off to the bedrooms, and another to a small washroom his father had insisted on building. "You will take the larger bedroom," Garrett said, setting her trunk down. "I will use the smaller one." Ainsley turned to him with surprise. "You are giving me your room. It is only right. You are my guest. I thought I was to be your wife. Eventually, maybe, if you decide you want that. But right now you are someone who has traveled 2,000 miles to a strange place, and you have lost something precious. I am not going to add pressure on top of that." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed different, softer somehow. "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect? Someone harder, I suppose, more demanding. The men in Philadelphia, they always wanted something. They courted with expectations." She wiped at her eyes. "I am sorry. I am not usually this emotional. It is just that locket. It had a photograph of my mother inside, from before she got sick. She was smiling in it, and I loved that picture because near the end she could barely smile at all. The consumption took everything from her slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but pain. That picture reminded me of who she had been before when she was still herself. Garrett swallowed hard. When did she pass? 2 years ago. I lived with my aunt and uncle after that, but my uncle lost his shipping business last year. They could barely feed their own children, let alone me. When I saw your advertisement, it seemed like Providence, a fresh start somewhere far away from all the memories. And instead, you have brought the most important memory with you and lost it along the way. Yes. She sank into one of the chairs, suddenly looking utterly exhausted. I feel like I have lost her all over again. Garrett moved to the stove and stoked the fire that he had banked that morning. I am going to make some coffee and some food. You need to eat something, and then you need to sleep. Tomorrow I will ride back along the stagecoach route and start looking for your locket. You cannot do that. You must have work to do here. I have 2 ranch hands who can handle things for a few days. This is more important. Why? The question came out almost as a challenge. Why does this matter so much to you? You do not even know me. Garrett paused, considering his answer carefully. When my mother died, my father could not bear to keep anything of hers around. He packed it all away in a trunk and put it in the barn, said it hurt too much to look at her things. But I snuck out there one night and took her Bible. I have carried it with me ever since. It is falling apart now, held together with leather strips I had to add, but I will never let it go. So I understand what that locket means to you, even if I do not know you well yet. Some things are worth searching for. Ainsley stared at him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. The raw desperation eased slightly, replaced by a tentative trust. "Thank you," she whispered. Over the next hour, Garrett prepared a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and cornbread while Ainsley sat at the table, too tired to do more than watch. He found himself acutely aware of her presence, the way she moved, the soft sounds of her breathing. It was strange having someone else in the house after so long alone. His father had been dead for 2 years now, and in that time, Garrett had grown accustomed to silence broken only by the sounds of wind and animals. Having a woman here, especially one so clearly refined despite her circumstances, made him feel simultaneously protective and awkward. "This is good," Ainsley said after taking a bite of the food. "Better than I expected. You expected bad cooking." "I expected bachelor cooking, which in my experience means either burnt or undercooked." Despite everything, Garrett found himself almost smiling. "My mother made sure I knew the basics before she died. Said no son of hers would starve just because he did not have a woman around." She sounds like she was wise. She was, tough as nails too, had to be living out here. He poured them both coffee. "What was your mother like?" Ainsley's face softened. "Gentle. Too gentle for the world sometimes, my father used to say. She loved music and poetry, and she would sing while she worked. Even when she got sick, even when it hurt her to breathe, she would hum these little melodies. The locket was from my father. He gave it to her on their wedding day. Where is your father now? He died when I was 15. Heart gave out suddenly one evening. The doctor said it was probably an aneurysm, that he would not have felt much pain. After that, it was just mother and me until the consumption took her." Her voice went distant. "Sometimes I feel like I am the last leaf on a tree, barely hanging on." "You are not alone anymore," Garrett said quietly. "Whether we end up married or not, you are not alone." She looked at him with those green eyes searching his face for something. "You are a good man, Garrett Preston. I try to be." After they ate, Garrett showed her to the bedroom and brought in a pitcher of fresh water for washing. He had changed the sheets that morning and done his best to make the room welcoming, though it was still sparse. Just a bed, a dresser, and a single chair by the window. Ainsley did not seem to mind. She looked ready to collapse. "If you need anything during the night, just call out," he said from the doorway. "I will hear you." "Garrett, will you really look for it tomorrow, First Light? I promise." She nodded, and he closed the door softly behind him. In his own smaller room, he lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in the house. He thought about the locket, about the enormity of trying to find something so small across so many miles of rough terrain. It seemed impossible, but he had meant what he said. Some things were worth searching for, even if the odds were against you. When dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Garrett was already saddling his horse. He packed supplies for several days: water, food, bedroll, and his rifle just in case. The Arizona Territory could be dangerous, with bandits and hostile wildlife both posing threats to lone travelers. He left a note for his ranch hands, explaining where he had gone, and filled a canteen from the well. Ainsley emerged from the house as he was preparing to leave. She had changed into a simpler dress of faded blue and pulled her hair back in a practical bun. In the morning light, with the signs of tears washed from her face, she looked younger than her 23 years. "You are really doing this," she said, more statement than question. "I told you I would. Let me come with you." Garrett shook his head. "The ride will be long and rough. You are exhausted from your journey already." "That locket is mine to find. I should be part of the search." "Ainsley, be reasonable. You have been traveling for days, you are emotionally exhausted, and you are not used to this terrain. You would slow me down." He saw her flinch at the blunt words and softened his tone. "I am not trying to be cruel. I am trying to be practical. You need rest, and I need to be able to move quickly and cover as much ground as possible." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I hate feeling so helpless." "Then help me by staying here and taking care of yourself. Make yourself at home. The hen house has fresh eggs every morning, and there is plenty of food in the pantry. My ranch hands, Carlos and Jimmy, they will be around if you need anything. Carlos is married. His wife Maria lives in their cabin just past the barn. She is kind. She can keep you company." "How long will you be gone?" "As long as it takes. Could be a day, could be a week." "And if you do not find it," Garrett swung up into the saddle, the leather creaking under his weight, "then I will keep looking until I do, or until I have searched every inch of road between here and Phoenix." He rode out before she could protest further, pointing his horse east toward the rising sun. The stage route was well marked, a ribbon of packed earth winding through the desert landscape. Garrett knew this country well. He had ridden it countless times over the years, first with his father and then alone. Every rock formation, every stand of saguaro cactus, every dry creek bed was familiar to him. The first way station was about 15 miles out, a small adobe structure run by a weathered old man named Dutch. Garrett arrived there mid-morning to find Dutch feeding his chickens. "Preston," Dutch said, squinting in the sun, "what brings you out this way?" "Looking for something that was lost. A locket, gold with a photograph inside, would have fallen somewhere between here and Phoenix in the last few days." Dutch scratched his stubbled chin. "Have not seen anything like that, but I will keep an eye out." "Whose locket?" "My mail-order bride's. It belonged to her mother." "Ah," Dutch nodded slowly. "That is a hard loss. I will ask the drivers when they come through, see if anyone has turned anything in." Garrett thanked him and continued on, his eyes scanning the ground on both sides of the road. The sun climbed higher, beating down with relentless intensity, and he was grateful for his wide-brimmed hat. He stopped frequently to dismount and examine anything that glinted in the harsh light, but found only broken glass and tin scraps. By evening he had covered nearly 25 miles and found nothing. He made camp in a small canyon that offered shelter from the wind, building a fire and cooking some of the salt pork he had brought. As he ate, he thought about Ainsley back at the ranch, probably worried, probably losing hope. The promise he had made to her felt heavier now, weighed down by the reality of the task. But he was not a man who gave up easily. His father had taught him that persistence mattered more than talent, that you could accomplish almost anything if you refused to quit. So the next morning he continued his search, working his way methodically along the route, stopping at each way station to ask questions and search the grounds. At the second station, run by a Mexican family named Reyes, the wife said she had seen something shiny in the dirt 2 days ago, but her daughter had taken it to play with. The daughter, a gap-toothed girl of maybe 7, brought out her treasure, a bent spoon. "Sorry, senor," the mother said, seeing Garrett's disappointment. "We will watch for your locket." The third day brought him to the outskirts of Phoenix, and still nothing. Garrett felt frustration building in his chest, but he pushed it down. He spent the afternoon walking the streets of Phoenix, asking at shops and the sheriff's office if anyone had turned in a gold locket. No one had. That night, staying in a cheap boarding house, Garrett lay awake questioning his strategy. He had been assuming the locket had fallen along the road, but what if it had been inside the coach the whole time? What if another passenger had found it and pocketed it? The thought made his jaw clench. He had promised Ainsley he would find it, but what if it was truly impossible? No. He could not think that way. He would search the route back to Wickenburg, examining every inch even more carefully than before. If the locket was out there, he would find it. The return journey took even longer because Garrett moved more slowly, sometimes crawling on hands and knees to examine spots where the afternoon light created shadows that might hide a small object. Other travelers passed him, some offering help when they learned what he was looking for, others shaking their heads at the futility of it. On the 5th day, as the sun began its descent and Garrett was beginning to despair, his horse suddenly shied at a snake crossing the road. Garrett steadied the animal, then dismounted to let it calm down. As he stood there, stroking the horse's neck and murmuring reassurances, something caught his eye just off the road, near a large creosote bush. A glint of gold, his heart hammering, Garrett walked over and knelt down. There, caught in the lower branches of the bush as if the plant itself had reached out to save it, was a golden locket on a delicate chain. He picked it up carefully, his hands shaking slightly. The locket was warm from the sun, and when he pressed the tiny clasp and opened it, he found himself looking at a photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She looked remarkably like Ainsley. Relief flooded through him so powerfully that he had to sit down for a moment. He had found it. Against all odds, he had actually found it. The locket must have fallen when Ainsley stepped out at one of the stops, and somehow it had ended up here, miraculously preserved. A few feet in either direction and he would have missed it. Another day or two and a storm might have buried it or washed it away. Garrett carefully placed the locket in his shirt pocket, the one closest to his heart, and made camp right there rather than risk losing it again. The next morning he rode hard for Wickenburg, pushing his tired horse as fast as he dared. The animal seemed to sense his urgency and responded gallantly. He arrived at the ranch just after noon to find Ainsley sitting on the porch with Maria, Carlos's wife. The two women looked up as he rode in, and Garrett saw the hope and fear warring on Ainsley's face. She stood slowly, one hand pressed to her chest, not daring to speak. Garrett dismounted and walked toward her, his hand going to his shirt pocket. "I found it," he said simply, pulling out the locket. Ainsley's face crumpled. She made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then she was running toward him. He barely had time to brace himself before she threw her arms around his neck, the locket pressed between them. She was crying again, but these were different tears, tears of relief and joy rather than despair. "You found it," she kept saying. "You really found it. I cannot believe you found it." Garrett let her cling to him, one hand coming up to rest gently on her back. She smelled like soap and sunshine, and the feel of her in his arms stirred something deep in his chest. When she finally pulled back, her face flushed and tear-streaked, she took the locket from him with reverent hands. "Where was it?" "About 30 miles out, caught in a bush just off the road." "Another few feet and I would have missed it completely." "You were gone for 6 days searching for something so small." She looked up at him with wonder in her eyes. "Why? Why would you do this for someone you barely know?" Garrett found himself at a loss for words. The truth was complicated, tangled up with his own loneliness and grief, with the way her tears had gutted him, with the strange pull he felt toward this woman who was supposed to be a practical arrangement but was already becoming something more. "Because you needed it," he said finally. "And because I promised." Ainsley opened the locket and looked at her mother's face, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you does not feel like enough, but I do not know what else to say." "You do not need to say anything." Maria, who had been watching the scene with bright eyes, cleared her throat. "I think you both should come inside. You must be hungry, Garrett and Ainsley. You look like you need to sit down." They followed her inside, where Maria had already prepared a meal. As Garrett ate, Ainsley told him about her week at the ranch. She had met Carlos and Jimmy, helped Maria with some sewing, and started exploring the property. Her hands kept going to the locket at her throat, touching it as if to reassure herself it was really there. "Carlos said you have been working this ranch alone for 2 years," she said. "That must have been difficult." "It was, still is sometimes. That is why I placed the advertisement. Just for the practical help." Garrett met her eyes. "That was the reason I told myself. But I suppose I was lonely too, even if I did not want to admit it." "I understand loneliness," Ainsley said softly. "I have been lonely since my mother died. My aunt and uncle were kind, but I always felt like a burden, someone they had to tolerate out of duty. I thought coming here would at least give me a purpose, a place where I was wanted even if it was just for practical reasons." "You are not a burden, Ainsley, and you are wanted for more than just practical reasons." She looked at him searchingly. "What are you saying?" Garrett set down his fork, choosing his words carefully. "I am saying that over the past 6 days, riding through the desert looking for that locket, I realized something. I was not just searching because I had made a promise or because I felt sorry for you. I was searching because the idea of you being in pain was unbearable to me. You matter to me, Ainsley Lawson. Maybe more than you should after only knowing you for a few days." Ainsley's breath caught. "You matter to me too. When you rode out that morning, I was terrified something would happen to you. Maria kept telling me you knew the land, that you could take care of yourself, but I could not stop worrying. And I realized I was not just worried about losing the person who was searching for my locket. I was worried about losing you." The air between them felt charged, heavy with possibility. Maria, sensing the moment, quietly excused herself, slipping out the door with a knowing smile. "I know this is all very fast," Garrett said. "You just got here, and we have only exchanged letters before now. But I do not want to wait months or years to tell you how I am starting to feel. Life is too short and too uncertain for that." "How are you starting to feel?" Ainsley asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like maybe you are the answer to a prayer I did not even know I was praying." He stood and moved to stand in front of her chair, then knelt down so they were eye level. "I know we talked about a quick ceremony in our letters, but I want to do this right. I want to court you properly, give you time to get to know me and this place. I want you to choose me because you want to, not because you feel obligated by an arrangement." Ainsley reached out and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his stubbled jaw. "What if I already am choosing you? What if these past days, waiting and hoping you would come back safely, have shown me everything I need to know about your character? It has only been a week. I know, but sometimes a week can teach you more than a year." She smiled, and it transformed her face, chasing away the shadows of grief. "You rode for 6 days searching for a tiny piece of gold that mattered to no one but me. You gave me your room and your time and your stubborn determination. You kept a promise when most men would have given up after the first day. What more do I need to know?" Garrett felt his throat tighten. "You need to know that ranch life is hard, especially for someone who is used to city living. You need to know that I am not always good with words, that I can be stubborn and I work too much. You need to know that this land is harsh and unforgiving, and that some days you might wonder why you ever left Philadelphia. And you need to know that I am stronger than I look," Ainsley replied. "That I am tired of being treated like I am fragile, just because I am educated and grew up in a city. You need to know that I want to build something, to have a purpose beyond sitting in a parlor doing needlework. And you need to know that I am not afraid of hard work or harsh land. I am only afraid of being alone." "You will never be alone," Garrett said fiercely, "not while I am alive. Then ask me properly." "Ainsley Lawson." He took her hands in his, feeling the slight tremor in her fingers. "Will you marry me? Not because of an arrangement or out of practical necessity, but because I am falling in love with you and I want to spend my life making sure you never feel alone or like a burden again." "Yes," she said, and then she was kissing him, her lips soft and warm against his. Garrett wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and felt something settle into place in his chest. This was right. She was right. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Ainsley laughed. "I suppose we should tell Maria and Carlos. They will want to help plan a wedding. We could go into town tomorrow, talk to the preacher." "Tomorrow? You said you wanted to court me properly." Garrett grinned. "I do. But I also do not want to wait any longer than necessary to make you my wife. We can have a short engagement, say a couple of weeks. That will give you time to make sure and give me time to fix up the house a bit more." 2 weeks, Ainsley agreed. "But I want to help with the house. I want to make it our home together, not just move into a space you have prepared for me." Over the next 2 weeks, Wickenburg had never seen such activity at the Preston ranch. Ainsley threw herself into preparations with an energy that surprised everyone, including herself. She and Maria became fast friends, working together to sew new curtains and clean every corner of the house. Ainsley revealed a talent for painting, creating a small mural of wildflowers on one wall of the kitchen that made the whole room feel brighter. Garrett found himself falling more in love with her each day. She was nothing like he had expected. The refined city woman who had arrived crying over a lost locket had steel beneath her gentleness. She learned to gather eggs without complaint, even when the rooster took a dislike to her and had to be chased off with a broom. She helped Maria in the garden, getting dirt under her nails and sun on her face, and she never once complained about the heat or the dust or the hard work. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch together, watching the sun set over the mountains. Sometimes they talked, sharing stories of their childhoods and their dreams for the future. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, shoulders touching, content just to be near each other. "I want children someday," Ainsley said one evening. "Is that something you want too?" "Yes," Garrett replied. "Though I will admit the idea terrifies me a bit. What if I am a terrible father? You will not be. You are patient and kind and you keep your promises. Those are the most important things." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I think my mother would have liked you. I wish I could have met her. So do I. But I have her locket now, thanks to you. I can still feel close to her. The day of the wedding dawned clear and hot, as most days did in Arizona territory. The ceremony took place in the small church in Wickenburg, with what felt like the entire town in attendance. News of Garrett's search for the locket had spread, turning their story into local legend, and everyone wanted to see the mail-order bride marry the cowboy, who had refused to give up on finding her lost treasure. Ainsley wore a simple dress of white cotton that Maria had helped her alter from one of her mother's old gowns. The locket hung around her neck, gleaming gold against her skin. When Garrett saw her walking down the aisle, his breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful, but more than that, she looked happy. The sadness that had haunted her eyes when she first arrived had been replaced by hope and joy. The ceremony was brief, the preacher keeping things simple at Garrett's request. When it came time to exchange vows, Garrett took Ainsley's hands and spoke from his heart. I promise to work hard to give you a good life. I promise to value you not just for what you can do, but for who you are. I promise that when you are sad, I will search heaven and earth to make you smile again. And I promise that you will never doubt you are loved. Ainsley's eyes shimmered with tears, but she smiled as she replied, I promise to be your partner in building our life here. I promise to face hardships with strength and celebrate joys with gratitude. I promise to keep your heart as carefully as I keep my mother's locket. And I promise that you will never doubt you are home. When the preacher pronounced them married, Garrett kissed his wife with a tenderness that made several of the ladies in attendance sigh romantically. The reception afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up outside and food brought by what felt like every family in the county. There was music and dancing, and Garrett discovered that Ainsley had not been exaggerating about her mother loving music. She had a beautiful voice that she used to lead several songs. As the sun began to set and the guests started to depart, Carlos pulled Garrett aside. You are a lucky man, boss. She is special. I know, Garrett said, watching Ainsley laugh at something Maria had said. Believe me, I know. That night, alone together for the first time as husband and wife, Garrett and Ainsley stood in their bedroom feeling suddenly shy with each other. The teasing and easy companionship of the past 2 weeks had given way to nervous anticipation. Are you scared? Garrett asked softly. A little, Ainsley admitted. But not of you, just of disappointing you. You could never disappoint me. He reached out and gently removed the pins from her hair, letting it fall around her shoulders in auburn waves. You are everything I did not know I needed. She touched the locket at her throat. I think my mother sent me to you. I know that might sound foolish, but when I saw your advertisement, something in me just knew. And then when I lost the locket, I thought maybe I had been wrong, that it was all a mistake. But you found it. You brought her back to me, and in doing so, you brought me home. We brought each other home, Garrett said. And then there were no more words, only gentle touches and whispered endearments as they came together. Two lonely people finding solace and joy in each other. The months that followed were not without challenges. Ranch life was indeed hard, especially as summer gave way to fall and then winter. There were cattle to tend, fences to mend, and 100 other tasks that needed constant attention. Ainsley threw herself into learning, determined to be a true partner rather than just a wife who kept house. She learned to ride, though it took weeks before she felt comfortable on horseback. She learned to shoot, both for hunting and for protection, because in the Arizona territory you never knew when you might need to defend yourself or your property. There were difficult days too. Days when the wind blew so hard it felt like the desert was trying to scour them from the earth. Days when Ainsley felt overwhelmed by homesickness and cried for her mother. Days when Garrett worked himself to exhaustion and snapped at her over something trivial. But they learned to weather these storms together, to apologize quickly and forgive fully. One evening in December, about 6 months after their wedding, Ainsley found Garrett in the barn tending to a mare that was about to foal. She watched him work for a moment, admiring the gentle competence with which he handled the nervous animal. "You remember the day I arrived?" she asked. Garrett looked up, surprised. "Of course. You were crying as if your heart had been broken." It had been, in a way. "I felt so lost and alone, and losing that locket was just the final thing that broke me. I think I cried for everything that day. My mother, my father, the life I had left behind, the uncertainty of what I was coming to." "Why are you thinking about that now?" Ainsley smiled and walked over to stand beside him. "Because I want you to know how different I feel now. I am home, Garrett, truly home for the first time since my mother died. This ranch, this life, you have given me everything I needed even when I did not know I needed it." Garrett straightened and pulled her into his arms. "You have given me just as much. This place feels alive again. It stopped being just a place I work and became a home." "I have something to tell you," Ainsley said, pulling back slightly to look up at him. "Something that makes it even more of a home." "What is it?" "I am with child. We are going to have a baby." The joy that flooded Garrett's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He picked Ainsley up and spun her around, making her laugh and protest that he would make her dizzy. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that it brought tears to her eyes. "Are you happy?" she asked. "Happy does not even begin to cover it. Ainsley, you have made me the luckiest man alive. Even though I arrived crying and causing trouble right from the start, especially because of that. You taught me that some things are worth fighting for, worth searching for, even when it seems impossible." He touched the locket that she still wore every day. "You taught me that sometimes the best things in life come from refusing to give up." Winter passed slowly, each day bringing Ainsley closer to motherhood. Garrett found himself constantly worried about her, fussing over her until she finally told him, with exasperated affection, that women had been having babies since the dawn of time, and she was not made of glass. But he could not help it. The thought of anything happening to her, or the baby, terrified him in a way that nothing else ever had. Maria became invaluable during this time, sharing her knowledge from her own 4 pregnancies and helping Ainsley prepare for what was to come. The two women spent hours sewing tiny clothes and blankets, and Maria told stories about her children that made Ainsley both excited and nervous for her own experience of motherhood. In April, when the desert was exploding with wildflowers after the winter rains, Ainsley went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting through an entire night and into the next day. Garrett paced outside the bedroom where Maria and the midwife from town attended his wife, feeling utterly helpless. Every cry of pain from Ainsley was like a knife to his heart, and he found himself praying more fervently than he had since his mother died. Finally, just as the sun reached its zenith, he heard a new sound, the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. Minutes later, Maria emerged, her face tired but wreathed in smiles. "You have a son," she said. "A big, healthy boy, and Ainsley is doing well. She is asking for you." Garrett practically ran into the room. Ainsley lay propped up on pillows, her hair damp with sweat and her face pale with exhaustion, but she had never looked more beautiful to him. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in the blue blanket she had sewn herself. As Garrett approached, she pulled the blanket back to reveal a small red face and a shock of dark hair. "Meet your son," she said softly. Garrett sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby with wonder. His son. He reached out a tentative finger and the baby's tiny hand immediately wrapped around it with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Garrett whispered. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking about that," Ainsley said. "What was your father's name?" George Preston. "And my father was called Arthur." "What about George Arthur Preston?" "George Arthur Preston," Garrett repeated, testing the weight of it. "I like it. George." The baby seemed to approve, making a small, satisfied sound and settling more comfortably against Ainsley's chest. Garrett leaned down and kissed his wife's forehead, overwhelmed with gratitude and love. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for him, for all of this." "We did it together," Ainsley replied, but her eyes were drooping with exhaustion. "Will you hold him while I sleep?" Garrett carefully took his son, terrified of dropping or hurting such a tiny, precious thing. But George seemed content in his father's arms, those dark eyes trying to focus on Garrett's face. As Ainsley drifted off to sleep and Maria quietly left them alone, Garrett sat holding his son and marveling at how much his life had changed. A little over a year ago he had been alone, working himself to the bone on a ranch that felt more like a prison than a home. He had placed an advertisement for a mail-order bride out of practicality, not expecting anything more than a business arrangement. But then Ainsley had arrived, crying over a lost locket, and everything had shifted. Her grief had called to something in him, some need to fix things and make them right, and in searching for what she had lost, he had found what he had not known he was missing. The years rolled on, bringing both hardship and joy. The ranch grew, expanding from 200 acres to 500 as Garrett and Ainsley built something substantial together. Ainsley proved to have a head for business, managing the accounts and finding new markets for their cattle. Garrett learned to delegate more, bringing on additional ranch hands as the operation grew, trusting others to help carry the load. George grew into a bright, curious boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn determination. When he was 3, Ainsley gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, and 2 years after that, another son they called William. The house that had once felt too empty now rang with the sounds of children laughing and playing. Through it all, Ainsley wore her mother's locket. She never took it off except to clean it, and sometimes Garrett would catch her touching it absently, as if drawing strength from the connection to her past. One evening, when George was 10 and the younger children were finally asleep, Ainsley and Garrett sat on the porch as they had done countless times before. "You ever regret it?" Garrett asked. "Leaving Philadelphia and coming here?" Ainsley looked at him in surprise. "Not for a single moment." "Why would you ask that?" "I do not know. Sometimes I wonder if you miss the culture and refinement of the city. Out here we are so isolated and you gave up so much." "I gave up nothing that mattered," Ainsley said firmly. "And I gained everything. A home, a family, a purpose. A man who would search for days to find a lost locket just to ease my pain." She reached over and took his hand. "Do you regret it? Marrying a woman who showed up crying and in distress?" "Never," Garrett said. "You were exactly what I needed, even if I did not know it at the time." "We saved each other," Ainsley said. "That is what I believe. I was drowning in grief and loneliness and you threw me a lifeline. But you were lost too in your own way and I helped you find your way home. You did more than that. You made it possible for me to love again. After my parents died, I think I closed off part of myself, afraid to care too much because loss hurt so badly. But you taught me that love is worth the risk." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one in the vast Arizona sky. In the distance, a coyote called, and closer by, the horses moved restlessly in their corral. These were the sounds of home, familiar and comforting. "I want to tell the children about how we met," Ainsley said. "About the locket and your search. They are old enough now to understand." What will you tell them? The truth. That sometimes love means keeping impossible promises. That sometimes the smallest things matter the most. That their father is a man of his word who taught me what true partnership looks like. Garrett felt his throat tighten. You make me sound better than I am. I describe you exactly as you are. She touched the locket at her throat. This holds a picture of my mother, but it means so much more than that now. It is a reminder that even when things seem lost forever, they can be found. That even when hope feels impossible, someone might surprise you by refusing to give up. That is what you did for me, and that is what we have done for each other every day since. As the years continued to pass, the story of the mail-order bride's lost locket and the cowboy who searched for it became part of local folklore. Young couples in Wickenburg would reference it when making promises to each other, and more than one woman wore a locket on her wedding day in tribute to Ainsley Preston's famous loss and recovery. The Preston Ranch became one of the most successful in the territory, and eventually, after Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, one of the most respected in the new state. But despite their prosperity, Garrett and Ainsley never forgot where they had started. Two lonely people who had taken a chance on each other through the mail, whose relationship had been forged in the crucible of loss and the determination to make things right. George grew up to take over much of the ranch management, showing the same dedication and work ethic his father had always demonstrated. Sarah became a teacher, bringing education to ranch children throughout the area. William, the youngest, surprised everyone by developing a talent for writing and eventually publishing a book of stories about life in the Old West. But through it all, the heart of the family remained Garrett and Ainsley. They grew old together, their hair going gray and then white, their faces weathering like the desert landscape they loved. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared experiences and tested by trials overcome together. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house and grounds were decorated with lanterns and wildflowers, and there was enough food to feed half the county. As the sun began to set, turning the sky brilliant shades of orange and purple, Garrett pulled Ainsley aside for a private moment. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "Garrett, you did not need to get me anything. You have given me everything already. Just open it." He handed her a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of desert flowers. Ainsley opened it carefully and gasped. Inside was a gold chain, and hanging from it was a second locket, this one clearly new. She opened it with trembling fingers and found two photographs, one of Garrett on their wedding day, young and serious, and one of herself holding newborn George. "I thought you might want more than one memory to carry close to your heart," Garrett said softly. "Your mother in one locket and our family in another." Ainsley's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy ones. "It is perfect. Will you help me put it on?" He fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers still deft despite the arthritis that had begun to stiffen his joints. Now she wore two lockets, the old one with her mother's image and the new one with memories of the life she and Garrett had built. "Do you remember when I promised I would find your locket?" Garrett asked. "That first day when you arrived crying, of course. I thought you were either foolish or impossibly kind. Maybe both. I was in love with you," he said. "I did not know it then, but I was already falling. That is why I could not stand to see you in pain. That is why I had to keep searching even when it seemed hopeless." "You loved me before you even knew me?" Ainsley asked, touched. "I loved your heart. The way you grieved for your mother so openly, so honestly. In that moment, I saw who you really were, someone who loved deeply and felt deeply, someone strong enough to show vulnerability." I knew right then that I would spend the rest of my life making sure you never had to cry like that again." Ainsley reached up and touched his weathered face. "You have kept that promise and so many others. You have given me a life beyond anything I imagined when I was that scared girl on the stagecoach." "We gave each other a life," Garrett corrected. "I was just existing before you came. You taught me how to truly live again." As they walked back to join their family, hands clasped, Ainsley felt the weight of both lockets against her chest. One represented the past, the other the present and future. Together they told the story of her life: loss and recovery, grief and joy, loneliness and love. The party continued late into the night, with music and dancing and stories told and retold. At one point, young Emma, George's oldest daughter, asked Ainsley to tell the story of the lost locket one more time. The children never tired of hearing it, this tale of their grandmother's arrival and their grandfather's search. Ainsley looked at Garrett, who nodded encouragingly, and began the familiar story. But as she spoke, she realized she was not just telling it for the children. She was telling it for herself, remembering the journey that had brought her here. The fear and uncertainty of leaving everything familiar behind. The overwhelming grief of losing her last connection to her mother. The shock and wonder of finding a man who would keep an impossible promise simply because he had said he would. "And did Grandpa really search for 6 whole days?" Emma asked, her eyes wide. 6 days, Ainsley confirmed. In the heat, riding back and forth along 50 miles of desert road, sleeping outside and eating cold food. He could have given up after the first day and no one would have blamed him. But he did not give up. He never gives up, your grandfather. It is one of the things I love most about him. Garrett, sitting nearby, felt his chest swell with emotion. After 30 years, Ainsley could still make him feel like the man he wanted to be. Strong, dependable, worthy of her love. She had believed in him from almost the very beginning, even when he had doubted himself. As the celebration wound down and family members began making their way to guest rooms or heading home, Garrett and Ainsley found themselves alone on the porch once more. It was their spot, had been since the earliest days of their marriage. This was where they had planned their future, where they had worried over sick children, where they had simply sat in companionable silence after long days of work. 30 years, Ainsley said softly. It feels like both forever and no time at all. You think your mother would be proud of you?" Garrett asked. "Of the life you have built," Ainsley touched both lockets, considering. "I think she would be happy that I found love. She always said that was the most important thing, finding someone who saw you clearly and loved you anyway, someone who would be your partner in all things." "That is what we are," Garrett said, "partners. Yes, in work, in family, in life." She leaned her head against his shoulder, the gesture as familiar as breathing after so many years. "Do you know what I think about sometimes? What would have happened if you had not found the locket? If you had searched and searched but come back empty-handed?" "I would have kept looking," Garrett said immediately, "until I found it or until there was no more place to search. But what if you truly could not find it? Would we still be here, do you think?" Garrett was quiet for a moment, considering honestly. "Yes," he said finally. "I think we would. The locket was important, but what really mattered was that I tried, that I showed you I meant what I said. The search itself was the point, not just the finding." "That is what I think too," Ainsley said. "You could have come back without it and I still would have known you were someone I could trust, someone I could love," she smiled. "Though I am very glad you found it. I do not know what I would have done if it was truly lost forever." "You would have survived," Garrett said with certainty. "You are stronger than you think. You were strong enough to leave everything you knew and travel 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, strong enough to build a life in a harsh land, strong enough to be the heart of our family." Ainsley felt tears prick her eyes. Even after 30 years, Garrett could still move her with his words. He was not a flowery speaker, he never had been. But when he spoke, he meant every word, and that meant more than any amount of poetry. The years continued to pass, bringing more grandchildren and eventually even great-grandchildren. Garrett's hair went completely white and his back began to bow, but he still rose early and rode out to check on the ranch, though now George or one of the ranch hands usually accompanied him. Ainsley's hands became gnarled with arthritis, making it harder to sew and do the fine work she once loved, but she remained active in the community and in her children's lives. They celebrated their 40th anniversary, then their 45th. On their 50th, the whole town of Wickenburg threw them a party. By then, they were local legends, the mail-order bride and the cowboy who had fallen in love over a lost locket. Young people listened to their story and saw it as impossibly romantic, the kind of tale that belonged in dime novels rather than real life. But Garrett and Ainsley knew better. They knew that love was not just one grand gesture, though the search for the locket had certainly been that. Love was 50 years of smaller gestures. Coffee made just right without asking, a hand to help you up when your knees protested, patience when illness made one of them irritable, forgiveness for thoughtless words spoken in anger or exhaustion. Love was choosing each other over and over again, through times of plenty and times of hardship. One evening in late fall, when Garrett was 72 and Ainsley 70, they sat on their porch watching the sun set. It had become harder for them to make it out here. The steps were challenging for Garrett's weakening legs, and the evening chill bothered Ainsley's arthritis. But they still tried to sit here when they could, unwilling to give up this ritual that had sustained them through so many years. "Do you remember the first time we sat here together?" Ainsley asked. "You asked if I wanted children," Garrett recalled. "I said yes, but admitted I was terrified of being a bad father. You were wonderful. You are wonderful." She reached over and took his hand, their fingers interlacing automatically. "I need to tell you something." Something in her tone made Garrett turn to look at her more closely. "What is it?" "I saw Dr. Mitchell last week. You know I have been feeling tired lately, more than usual." Garrett's heart clenched. "What did he say?" "My heart is failing. He said I probably have a year, maybe less." She said it calmly, but Garrett could see the fear in her eyes. "I wanted to wait to tell you until after the anniversary, but I do not want to keep secrets from you." For a moment, Garrett could not speak. The world seemed to tilt, the familiar porch and setting sun suddenly strange and distant. Finally, he managed, "There must be something they can do, some treatment." "Not for this. My heart is worn out, Garrett. I have lived a good long life, longer than my mother or father managed. It is simply time." "No." The word came out fierce, almost angry. "It is not time. We still have more years ahead of us. Maybe not as many as we would like, but yes, we have some time still." She squeezed his hand. "I am not afraid, you know. I have had such a good life. More than I ever dreamed of when I was a lonely girl in Philadelphia." "I am not ready to lose you," Garrett's voice cracked. "I do not know how to be in this world without you. You will manage because you must. For our children and grandchildren, for the ranch, for yourself." She touched both of the lockets at her throat. "And I will be here, in a way, carried close to someone's heart, just like my mother is carried close to mine." The next months were precious and painful in equal measure. Ainsley grew weaker gradually, her stamina fading until even walking to the porch required help. But her mind remained sharp and her spirit undimmed. She spent her remaining time talking with each of her children and grandchildren, sharing memories and wisdom, making sure they knew they were loved. Garrett rarely left her side. He had spent his life working, building, doing, but now his only job was to be present, to hold her hand, to tell her stories about their life together, to simply exist in the same space as the woman who had been his partner for more than 50 years. One afternoon in April, as the desert bloomed with wildflowers just as it had the day George was born, Ainsley asked Garrett to bring her both lockets. She held them carefully, looking at the photographs inside, her mother young and smiling, Garrett on their wedding day, their family through the years. "I want you to give these to the right people after I am gone," she said. "The one with my mother, that should go to Sarah. She is most like her, I think, gentle and loving but with steel underneath. Sarah will treasure it," Garrett promised. "The one you gave me for our anniversary with our family photographs, that should go to Emma. She loves the story of the lost locket, and I think she will understand what it represents. I will make sure she gets it." Ainsley closed the lockets and held them against her heart. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For finding it. For searching when it seemed impossible. For loving me so completely that you spent 6 days in the desert looking for a tiny piece of gold that mattered to no one but me. That search, that refusal to give up, it set the tone for our entire marriage. You taught me what it meant to be truly loved." Garrett felt tears running down his weathered cheeks. "You taught me the same thing. Before you came, I thought love had to be complicated, hard to find. But it was right there in the letters we exchanged, in the tears you cried when you stepped off that stagecoach, in every moment we have shared since." "We had a good life, did we not?" Ainsley asked, her voice growing faint. "The best," Garrett said. "The very best." Ainsley died 3 days later, peacefully in her sleep with Garrett holding her hand. The funeral was the largest Wickenburg had ever seen, with people coming from all over the state to pay their respects. She had touched countless lives through her kindness, her strength, and her example of what it meant to love deeply and live fully. After she was laid to rest in the small cemetery outside town, Garrett returned to the ranch that felt too empty without her. He gave the lockets to Sarah and Emma as Ainsley had requested, and both women cried as they accepted these precious links to the past. For a while, Garrett lost himself. He tried to work as he always had, but his heart was not in it. He sat on the porch in the evenings, but without Ainsley beside him, it felt wrong, incomplete. The house was full of her presence, her sewing basket still in the corner, her favorite shawl draped over a chair, her books on the shelf. But she was gone, and the absence was a physical ache. It was George who finally shook him out of his grief. "Papa," he said one evening, "I know you are hurting, we all are, but Mama would not want you to just fade away. She would want you to live the time you have left." "I do not know how to live without her," Garrett admitted. "You lived before you met her. You can live now that she is gone. It will be different and it will hurt, but you can do it." George put his hand on his father's shoulder. "Tell me about the locket, about how you found it. You have heard that story 100 times. Then tell me 101st. I want to hear it from you, how you felt during those 6 days." So Garrett told the story again, but this time he focused on parts he had never shared before. How terrified he had been that he would fail. How each night he had lain under the stars wondering if he was a fool for even trying. How the moment he saw that glint of gold in the creosote bush, he had felt like he could fly. How riding back to Wickenburg with the locket over his heart, he had known with absolute certainty that Ainsley was going to be the most important person in his life. "That is how I want to remember Mama," George said when the story was done. "Not as someone we lost, but as someone you found. Someone you fought for and loved with everything you had." Garrett nodded slowly. "Yes, that is exactly what she was." He lived 3 more years after Ainsley's death, years spent watching his grandchildren and great-grandchildren grow, Years spent telling stories about the ranch's history and the remarkable woman who had helped build it. He never remarried. The idea was unthinkable. Ainsley had been his partner, his love, his home. There could never be another. On a warm evening in June, Garrett passed away quietly in his sleep. He was 75 years old. When they prepared him for burial, they found he was clutching something in his hand. A faded photograph of a young woman in a traveling dress, her auburn hair catching the light, her green eyes full of hope, despite the tear tracks on her cheeks. Someone had managed to capture an image of Ainsley the day she arrived in Wickenburg. Before anyone knew her story would become legend. They buried Garrett next to Ainsley in the cemetery, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The entire town came, just as they had for Ainsley's funeral. The Preston Ranch had become an Arizona institution by then, and the story of its founders was known throughout the state. Years later, when Emma's own daughter asked to hear the story of the lost locket, Emma brought out the gold chain with its precious photographs. She told her daughter about a young woman who arrived in Arizona territory with nothing but grief and hope, and about a cowboy who refused to accept that something precious was lost forever. He searched for 6 days, Emma said, just as her grandmother had told her. Through heat and dust and doubt, he searched because he had made a promise. And when he found it, he gave your great-great-grandmother more than just a piece of jewelry. He gave her proof that some people keep their word, that some love is worth fighting for, that some searches are worth making even when they seem impossible. Did they live happily ever after? The little girl asked. Emma smiled. They lived really ever after, which is better. They had hard times and good times, arguments and reconciliations, struggles and triumphs. But through it all they had each other, and that made all the difference. The Preston Ranch continued to operate for another generation, and then another, each one adding to the legacy while honoring the foundation that Garrett and Ainsley had built. The story of the mail-order bride and the cowboy became part of Arizona history, told and retold, embellished and mythologized. But at its heart, it remained a simple truth. 2 lonely people had found each other across 2,000 miles of distance and built a love that lasted a lifetime. A woman had lost something precious, and a man had searched until he found it. And in that search, both of them had discovered that the greatest treasures are not the ones we seek, but the ones we find along the way. The Lockets, both of them, stayed in the family for generations, passed down from mother to daughter, each woman adding her own chapter to the story. They became symbols not just of memory and loss, but of love and perseverance, of the kind of commitment that refuses to accept defeat. And somewhere in the Arizona desert, in the shadow of the Weaver Mountains, the land that Garrett and Ainsley loved still blooms with wildflowers every spring. If you go there at the right time of year when the sun is setting and the light turns everything golden, you can almost see them. A cowboy and his bride sitting on an old porch, hands clasped, watching the day end and knowing that whatever tomorrow brings, they will face it together. Because that is what love is. Not a single grand gesture, though those have their place, but rather 1,000 small choices, made over and over to keep searching, to keep believing, to keep holding on even when it seems impossible. That is the real story of the lost locket. Not just that it was lost and found, but what that search represented. A promise kept, a heart determined, a love that refused to give up. And in the end, is there any better definition of happily ever after than that?